It is episode 3 of Jack and Jack as we discuss a very compelling weekend of sports. So please welcome back Mr. Jack MacArthur.
I appreciate it. Happy to be back on here. Looking forward to talking about some sports with my guy Jackson.
And Jack, I want to get to first thing I know you're very excited about, but the shutout on Friday night, Oregon holding Purdue to 0 points, and with the Texas loss to Georgia, it means the new number 1 team in the country is the Oregon Ducks. I just want to get your thoughts on Oregon going to number 1 now.
I mean, obviously it's huge. I mean, the Ducks are 7-0, and I think they haven't lost a game in Autzen in years. And it was a pretty dominant win for the Ducks. It was the first time the Ducks got a shutout on the road since 1992, so in over 30 years. So it's a huge deal. So tremendous win for Oregon. Dylan Gabriel had a pretty solid game. 290 yards, including that 60-yard bomb to Evan Stewart in the first quarter, and there was PI, but they just declined the penalty because it was a catch. And so he was 21 for 25, 290 yards, 2 tutties, and 1 pick. Jordan James with 2 touchdowns had an underwhelming second half, but he had 50 yards. I thought it was a pretty crazy game to watch, and I didn't expect the Ducks to shut out Purdue. I don't think anybody did, but the Ducks are 7-0, and it's the first time, I believe it's the third time in Oregon's history they've been ranked number 1, so pretty big deal.
And Jack, I want to go back to what you said there. You were not expecting the shutout at all.
No, I think, yeah, my original prediction was Ducks win by 20.
Okay, so I mean, they still won by more than 20. I think they shut them out. Was it 27 or 28-0? Something like that?
It was 35-0.
Oh, 35-0. Okay.
The Ducks scored 14 in the first quarter, 7 in the second quarter. They didn't score in the third, and then they scored 14 more in the fourth, making it 35-0.
So, of course, you weren't expecting the shutout, but now that the Ducks are still unbeaten, does the thought process go through your head that there is a chance that they can finish the season perfect?
Yeah, there's definitely a chance. I was pretty confident in their ability to beat Ohio State recently, and they did that. Even though they beat Ohio State by 1, I believe Jordan Birch was playing that game. The Ducks would have been even more dominant, and there were a couple interesting calls in that game. But I do think that the Ducks should go undefeated, and I think they will go undefeated. I mean, a lot of people say, it's a trap game against Purdue, or it's going to be a trap game against, a team like Michigan or Washington. But what people don't realize is they're playing Illinois at home. The Ducks are playing the Huskies at home. Wisconsin's on the road. Michigan's on the road. And I believe Maryland's at home as well. So I think the Ducks will go undefeated. What do you think, Jackson? In the regular season, at least.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. We talked about 2 weeks ago, I think, when we previewed the game against Ohio State. We talked about how the Ducks and the Buckeyes could be another matchup, rematch that we see in the Big Ten title game. Now, of course, Ohio State does have that one loss because Oregon beat them. But I think going forward, there are a lot of people that I have seen on X that say Oregon is most likely to end the season 11-1 because a lot of people have them losing the game in Madison when they go to take on the Badgers. I think that, along with the Michigan game, is going to be kind of their biggest test. Now, I know I said a couple weeks ago that it's also going to be a big test when they host Washington. I'm going to rescind that because I know Washington has beaten them the last 3 times, but let's talk about what Washington has done. It's not much. They have not won very many games in the Big Ten this year. The last couple weeks they've played 9 a.m. kicks and it has not really benefited them. So for them to go to Eugene at the end of the season, I'm going to say Oregon handily wins that one against the Huskies. But I do think that the Ducks' biggest tests are going to be against Wisconsin and Michigan. And just because Michigan and Wisconsin, Michigan and Washington, they were both in the national championship last year. But both those teams lost key players. They lost, most of their roster from the championship game, and especially hurt Michigan because, Michigan started the season with that loss to Texas. But they seem to kind of have picked themselves up a little bit. They did lose to Illinois last week, so that sets up a really good matchup at Autzen Stadium next weekend, Jack, with Illinois going to Oregon. And looking at the line here, Oregon opens as a 22-point favorite. And I saw an interesting thing also scrolling through the social medias, and Oregon is number 1 in the country. The last time they were number 1 ranked in the country, they had a home game the next week against a ranked opponent and lost. So they have a ranked opponent with Illinois, the Fighting Illini, coming to Eugene next week. So certainly that's going to be an interesting game, and we'll be looking forward to watching that one at 12:30 on CBS.
Yeah, I mean, the Ducks should easily cover there. To be fair, the line against Purdue was, I think, minus 27.5, so they had to win by at least 28 for Oregon bettors to cover there. I mean, they shut out Purdue. I don't think, like I said, anybody expected that. I expect this momentum to carry on into this weekend against Illinois. I mean, if they can beat Purdue 35-0 on the road, then they can beat Illinois by at least 22, maybe 23. I say Oregon takes that game by 27-30, around there. We could give a prediction real quick. First off, I just want to ask you, what do you think the final score of that Oregon-Illinois game will be? Do you think this is a trap game for Oregon?
I want to say yes, but I'm going to go with no. I think, because you know me as someone that does not care for the Ducks, but watching them this season, I mean, they annihilated my Beavers. So, I mean, you have to give them a lot of credit. Their first 2 games, they struggled against Idaho and Boise State. But since then, they have picked themselves back up and kind of have gone on a roll. Now, granted, they only won by 1 against Ohio State, but, that was kind of expected. That was anticipated to be a close game. Ohio State was favored in that game at Autzen. So, I mean, of course that's going to be a close game. That was so far their biggest test, and they passed by beating the Buckeyes. And they come back the following week and absolutely destroy Purdue, shutting them out. And Illinois, you have to look at Illinois last week. They beat Purdue by 1 in overtime. So for Illinois to go to Autzen after that, it's going to be a tough test. I don't think they're going to pass. I'm going to take the Ducks. They're going to beat Illinois. I don't think they are going to cover. I think it is going to be less than a 22-point game. I'm going to say Oregon wins this one by 10, maybe a dozen. I'm going to say they win this one. I'm going to say 42-30. I'm going to say by a dozen.
Wow, 42-30. Okay. Real quick, I'll give my prediction. I think Oregon has to win that game. I'll say 44 to. They win by 27 points. 44-17.
44-7. Okay. Jack, I want to get your thought on another game that you might not have stayed up to watch. I tried to stay up as much as I could last night, but I was battling a pounding headache, and I ended up making it to the end, but it was really not worth it as UNLV came to Corvallis and defeated Oregon State 33-25. And I want to ask, I don't know if you saw that final play of the game where Oregon State had a goal to go on the goal line, and McCoy threw an incomplete pass, and all the fans were wanting a flag for PI. And watching the replay, I hate to say, because I hate to go against the Beavs, I think that was the right no call. I mean, you have to look at the defender and the receiver getting their feet tangled. I mean, that isn't a penalty. If you get tangled, that should not be thrown as a flag. I think Oregon State had a great chance at the end. Now, granted, even if they had scored a touchdown on the play, they still would have had to get the 2-point conversion to tie the game. But I just want to get your thought on how UNLV came all the way back after being down by 20, basically, in the first half and winning that game at Reser.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch the game, but according to the stats, it just seemed like it's really shocking that the Beavers lost that game because UNLV's quarterback, Williams, he didn't do very well. He was 15 for 27, 196 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 pick with a 63.5 quarterback rating compared to Oregon State's quarterback McCoy, who had 84.4 QBR with no touchdowns and 0 picks. But I mean, the stats don't lie. I think McCoy choked a lot too because he didn't have any touchdowns. I mean, it seemed like Oregon's passing game was doing a little bit better than their rushing game. I mean, they only had 137 rushing yards comparatively to their 231 receiving yards, but they fumbled. And I mean, I would say overall the biggest difference is just the fact that Oregon's offense just wasn't really doing that much. I mean, Oregon State's offense, wasn't doing that much. But what did you think about that game?
I was kind of not following along for the entirety of the game just because I was also I had to go cover the Vandals volleyball game, so I was not really able to watch much of that game, but I was listening to a lot of it on the radio, listening to Mike Parker as he was sounding a little bit more and more depressed towards the end of the game. I just thought, it just shows our defensive struggle. We were just overpowered in that second half. UNLV came back. They, overtook. They went on a 20-0 scoring run. We led, 17-6 at one point, and then they go on that run to go up 26-17, and then, from there they go on to win 33-25. Overall, I just thought, it was a game that we started strong. We just couldn't finish the job.
Yeah, I mean, you let Williams have 13 carries, 65 yards, and 2 scores for UNLV, and that's their quarterback. So their quarterback's did a lot on the ground, not even throwing the ball. But I do think that the Beavers could be able to bounce back. I just think they've had a rough stretch as of late.
Oregon State goes to Berkeley next Saturday, where they have a date with the Cal Golden Bears. What used to be a Pac-12 matchup is now a Pac-2 ACC matchup, so that should be an interesting one. That one kicks off at 1 o'clock on ESPN2. Oregon State should win that game. I believe they are favored by a touchdown the last time I looked at the line. So hopefully they can win. What I'm hoping, Jack, for Oregon State is, nobody's given us a lot of love. We're 4-3 right now, but as long as we can win 2 more games, we're going to a bowl game. So, that's kind of where we stand right now of what Oregon State fan expects. With 3 losses right now, where we don't really have a chance to go to the playoff, and really, nobody's given us a lot of love right now. But as long as we can win 2 more games, we're going to a bowl game. Next week against Cal should be our 5th win. So really looking forward to that one, Jack. But transitioning forward now, I want to get to a couple of games from this last weekend, specifically from the SEC, because, they were in prime time. They were very good games. I want to talk about Alabama and Tennessee, and what ended up being a very, very enticing game until the very end, when Tennessee was holding on against Alabama on their final drive. This was Sean McDonough's call of Tennessee's game-sealing play.
Williams has been targeted 19 times. Jalen Milroe fires, and it is intercepted! Will Brooks picked it off! Second interception thrown by Milroe, and that one will wrap it up for Tennessee. A huge play by Will Brooks, the Birmingham, Alabama native.
So Tennessee beats Alabama 24-17, gives Alabama its 2nd loss under head coach Kalen DeBoer. Jack, as a Duck fan, does this kind of, make you a little bit happy? Knowing, Kalen DeBoer came from Washington. He goes to Alabama after Nick Saban retires. And we're already 7 weeks into the season. And for the first time since 2007, Alabama already has 2 losses at this point of the year.
Yeah, pretty crazy. I think it definitely makes me happy. I mean, as you mentioned, DeBoer came from Washington, and he's done an okay job. I mean, Georgia's a good team. They fell to Georgia. Tennessee, they're also a pretty good team, but I honestly expected the Crimson Tide to win, which was kind of shocking to me because entering that game, I know Alabama was a favorite, but I don't know how big of a favorite. All I know is that Jalen Milroe did not have a good game at all. He had 1 touchdown, threw 2 picks, had a 65 quarterback rating. He threw just above 50%. He had just above a 50% completion rate, 25 for 45. That is not good at all for 239 yards. Tennessee's quarterback, Nico Lamlieva, 14 for 27, 192 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. He did all right. He had an okay game. We'll call it a mid-average game. But Milroe kind of choked. He didn't do very well. And I think that the biggest difference was that Alabama didn't have a good run game. Jam Miller's been pretty good this season. He had 12 carries for 42 yards, only 3.5 yards a carry. So Tennessee had some good defense in that game. And as a team, Alabama collectively rushed for 75 yards compared to Tennessee, who rushed for 220. So I think that Tennessee just exemplified how they're a very versatile team and they pass and threw the ball well.
Alabama goes back home next weekend. They have another 12:30 ABC primetime game as they host Missouri, and Missouri ranked number 21 in the country. Jack, do you think that's going to be another test for them?
I mean, Alabama should win that game. I think that they'll bounce back and beat Missouri by at least 14. I mean, Milroe, he's done pretty good this season overall. He had an off game. Their rushing game's pretty solid too. I think that the Crimson Tide should bounce back and win this game by at least 14. I'll say they win by 17.
Alabama is favored by 14 in that game against Missouri. And another game I wanted to get to, Jack, of course, the big one from the weekend was the Bulldogs going down to Tennessee to play to Texas to play the Longhorns. And, a lot of people gave a lot of love to Texas. They were the number 1 team in the country. They had beaten Michigan early in the year. They were riding hot 6-0. Georgia came in after, having that loss to Alabama and on the verge of potentially having their second loss handed to them by Texas. But I mean, that was just a game we were not expecting to go so well for Georgia. And there were so many turnovers that Texas committed that cost them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Texas, I expected them to win this game, surely. Georgia, they doubled Texas' score. They won 30-15. The thing that has surprised me the most is Carson Beck, Georgia's starting quarterback, throwing 3 interceptions. That's very shocking to me. He went 23 for 41, 175 yards, no touchdowns, and 3 picks. That's just unbelievable. Quinn Ewers, on the other hand, he had a not the best game. I mean, 25 for 43, 2 touchdowns and 1 pick, 211 yards. He did all right. I mean, the completion percentage is not very good, but he only threw 1 pick comparatively to Beck's 3. But I think the biggest difference, the thing that stood out to me, was Georgia's rush game. I mean, Trevor Etienne, he had 19 carries, 87 yards, 3 touchdowns. So Georgia's rushing game is just solid right now. So I think that's what really got them this win.
Did you see the biggest moment of the game when they overturned a pass interference call that was originally against Texas on an interception thrown by Beck? And they ruled it pass interference at first, which gave Georgia the possession back. And then after a discussion, the officials changed their mind and determined there was no foul. So Texas got to keep the ball at Georgia's 22-yard line. I don't know if you saw that moment, but here was the moment called by Chris Fowler.
Someone has shown their displeasure in a stupid way by throwing a beer can on the field. That's an enormous call, and I don't know about that at all.
I don't either. Sark doesn't usually get that animated, but man, this is a huge call. Contact both ways. Both guys looking at the football. The entire
the students are now raining bottles down there. This is unfortunate. This is going to delay the game. That's the student section down there in the corner. They're not going to win the Taco Bell contest at this rate.
No.
But I tell you, look, these guys have a tough job, especially on these plays on the edge. But calls like that can influence outcomes. Sarkisian down there pleading with them to stop doing that. There are hundreds of water bottles in that end zone. Somebody did it early, and then there was just a whole bunch of copycats.
And Sark's all the way over the 10-yard line, telling them to chill out.
Doing a good job getting a whole bunch of folks involved in cleaning up the end zone.
I mean, that call will be talked about no matter how this game ends. Because I don't know. I'm glad, again, Bill, you're up here, because I don't know how you make a call where both guys at the top of a route kind of go into each other.
Down.
Are they talking about the bottles right now being thrown on the field? And are they trying to get the... Bill, what do you think this discussion's about?
It could be a discussion about that. Personally, I'd leave it alone. You're going to have things like this happen once in a great while. Leave it alone, move on with the game.
There was no defensive pass interference.
Oh, my goodness.
The ball will be at the 9-yard line.
Kirby cannot believe it. So Bill Lamagna, a discussion. They have changed their call, which is an enormous moment in this game.
Yeah.
Are you surprised they changed it, Bill?
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'd like to know how it came about, who stepped up, who came in to talk about it, because it's not reviewable. It would have to be an on-field decision.
Well, they
took a while to do that.
No, we saw them talking. We didn't know, was this about where the ball's located after all the action? I knew Kirby. I knew this would light his fuse.
So that was Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit on the call for Georgia and Texas, that controversial moment in the third quarter when pass interference was called, and then fans started throwing bottles onto the field, and the officials, after discussing, they changed the call to Texas keeping the ball with the interception. Although you have to think back to that moment, Jack, it really didn't matter because Georgia still went on to win the game.
Yeah, you're right. It didn't matter. I wasn't able to hear the call just because of audio differences that we have on this podcast. But I did see the video of it on ESPN later, the highlight of the interception, the fans throwing things. It was pretty hysterical, in my opinion. But yeah, no, I mean, Georgia, huge win for them. That's got to give them a confidence boost after that loss to Alabama. They beat Alabama and then kept going, I guess. But I think that overall, Georgia, I didn't expect them to beat them by 15. Did you?
I was expecting it to be like a field goal game. You know, I think I picked Georgia in the college pick'em. I didn't think Texas was going to cover. I didn't really have a thought on who would win that game. But I did think it was going to be close.
Yeah, no, I misspoke. I was right the first time. Alabama did win that game 41-34, but I think that it was a pretty entertaining game against Texas. It came down to the fact that, Texas, their offense started becoming good in the third quarter when they scored 15, and then Georgia just came out on top with a 15-point win. But I think that overall it was, like I said, Georgia's rush game. I mean, their receiving was pretty good too when you talk about the way they threw the ball. But I mean, 110 rushing yards is pretty good compared to Texas's 29 rushing yards. So you got to give credit to that Georgia offense. But yeah, pretty entertaining game.
Georgia goes to their bye and then will host Florida out of that in 2 weeks. As for Texas, we talked about this a little bit last week, Jack, and we thought, it would be so funny if they did the same thing Alabama did and beat Georgia, because now they go to Vanderbilt and play the Commodores, and they still do, but now they come off a loss. So what would be even more hilarious is if they still lose to Vanderbilt and Texas goes from 6-0 now dropping 2 straight to 6-2, and Vanderbilt not only having big wins against Alabama but also Texas. But unfortunately for Vandy, Texas will not be the number 1 team this week when they come play them.
Right. Yeah, I think that, considering the fact, I believe it's in Texas, but I could be wrong.
No, it's at Vanderbilt.
Okay, so it's at Vanderbilt. So I think that this game could go either way. I mean, considering the fact that Texas just choked and Quinn Ewers didn't have that good of a game, I mean, if Vandy's defense can show up and they can play as good of a ball game as they did against Alabama, then it's not out of the picture for Vandy to win this game. I'm going to say, because of the home field advantage, I mean, coming into the game, Texas, they're 20 seeds higher, and they're obviously a favorite. But I'll say Vanderbilt wins this game by 10. I say they shock people, and it's not going to be like a game-winning field goal. I say Vandy wins by 10. Final score 38-28. Vandy wins.
Wow, you're going with the upset. Texas is favored by 20, by the way. And I don't think there is no chance Texas loses this game after dropping to Georgia. They're going to make a statement, still being in the SEC after suffering their first SEC loss. I would not be surprised if Texas puts up 50 or 60 on Vanderbilt.
No way they score 60, but we'll see.
I'm going to say Texas wins this game 55-24. I'm going to say they win by a whole lot, and they put up a 50 burger on Vandy.
That's a wild take, but I mean, that's what we're here for in this podcast. I mean, we've had some wild takes in the past, but that's an interesting one for sure. I think maybe I can't tell which take is hotter. Me saying that, I mean, it is in Vandy, to be fair, it's not in Texas, but I can't tell more outlandish. My take that Vanderbilt's going to win by 10 at home, even though they're the 25 seed against the 5, or your take that Texas is going to drop a 50 bomb and win by 31 points. So it's going to be interesting, but we'll see how it plays out.
Well, when we talk to each other next week, we'll find out to see who was closer. Another big game I want to just mention real quick, but not really go much forward on, is the ABC primetime game between LSU and Texas A&M. So that should be a good one in College Station. Jack, I want to switch sports now as we condense down on time here in this episode. The World Series is half set. We had the American League champion crowned with this call from Brian Anderson.
Here's the 1-2. Thomas, fly ball right field. Who else should end this game than that man right there? Juan Soto puts it away, and the New York Yankees have won the American League pennant.
So the World Series will consist of the New York Yankees for the first time since 2009. We don't know who is going to be represented out of the National League quite yet, Jack. Game 6 of the NLCS is being played right now as we are recording this episode between the Dodgers and the Mets. The Dodgers have a 3-2 lead in the series. Jack, do you think that they're going to win Game 6 tonight and go to the World Series, or are you going to be expecting a 7th game?
I mean, I am going to be expecting the Dodgers to win this game. They're down 1-0 right now in the bottom of the first, but you know how baseball is. It's an extremely lengthy and long game. And I'll say the Dodgers end up winning this one 7-4. I think that Teoscar Hernandez is going to hit a bomb, and Ohtani's going to go crazy and go yard again. And I think it'll come down to the wire, but like I said, I think the Dodgers win by 2 or 3. I'll say Dodgers win 7-4. And like I said weeks ago, I think it was at least a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I have the Dodgers winning the World Series against the Yankees. So it could be, my prediction could be right. I got the Dodgers winning the World Series in 6 against the Yanks.
Well, depending on if it goes today or tomorrow, the World Series has its set date for Game 1. It'll be Friday at 5 o'clock Pacific time on Fox and also on ESPN Radio. If the Dodgers win the series, or if the Dodgers win the NLCS, the World Series will begin in LA. If the Mets win, then the series will begin in the Bronx. Is there a lot of home field advantage, you think, in the World Series, Jack? We've seen a lot with the playoffs this year, and especially with the wild card. I mean, you have to look at the teams that played in the wild card. You know, the Astros, who were the host to the Tigers, they got swept. You look at the Royals, who took on the Orioles. They won that one. So a lot of the road teams have gotten some wins here in the Major League Baseball postseason. So it doesn't really seem like so far home field has been much of an advantage. Do you think that's going to change as we get to the World Series?
I guess it really does truly depend on who qualifies for the World Series, because if the Mets muster a wild comeback, because they already won Game 5, or excuse me, they won Game 5 against the Dodgers. I mean, if the Mets come back and win this series, then it won't really matter, because it's going to be, both teams are from New York, so it won't really matter. But I think that it's going to be interesting if it was a Mets Yankees World Series. But if it is Dodgers and Yankees in the World Series, it's definitely going to come down to the home field advantage. Because I've been in Dodger Stadium once or twice in my life, and it's pretty loud. I've never been to Yankee Stadium, but I will definitely go someday. So what do you think? You think the home field advantage matters? Because personally, I think it will come down to that.
I don't think so. I mean, you have to look at the last couple of World Series, because, of course, Texas won the World Series last year on the road. They basically won, Game 5 in Arizona. And then the year before, I believe it was the Astros. They did win at home. So they were the last team to win the World Series, being that home field. But I'm going to say the Mets, I'm still riding with the hot Mets. Like you said, they're up 1-0 right now. I think they come back, win Game 6, they come back and win Game 7, and it's going to be a Subway Series between the Mets and the Yankees, just because, I think that would be cool. Especially because Grimace is a big part of the Mets now, and he's been a big fan. And whatever it is, the World Series starts Friday. We're going to be looking forward to it. Another sport I want to mention right now, Jack, we have Game 5 of the WNBA Finals going on right now between the Minnesota Lynx and the New York Liberty. It's 19-10 Minnesota right now at the end of the first quarter. And, of course, everyone knows Sabrina Ionescu. She went to Oregon. She's on the Liberty. Do you have any prediction? They're down 9 right now, but who's going to win this fifth and final game of the finals?
I'll say the Liberty come back and win by 6, because I remember watching Liberty Lynx game earlier last week, and the Liberty were down by, I think, 8 at halftime in game. I think it was Game 3, and they ended up winning that game with the Sabrina Ionescu three-pointer near the death of that game with like a second left. That was a pretty crazy game to watch, but I'll say Liberty win, because I got to pull for the former Duck, Sabrina. So
I'm gonna go against the former Duck herself. No offense to Sabrina, but I'm just gonna go.
Or me.
Yeah, well, actually, no, I don't care if I offend you. But I'm going to say Minnesota just to go opposite of you. I want to go back to football here real quick, Jack, before we end, and just talk about this day of the NFL that we had. Of course, only one team remains unbeaten in the National Football League, and that would be the Kansas City Chiefs after defeating the San Francisco 49ers today. And Minnesota came into today as the only other undefeated team, but they fell to their rival, the Detroit Lions, and the mighty Fighting Dan Campbells. And I just want to give myself a shout out right now, because so far I have been nearly perfect. The only game I picked wrong in the Pick'em League was San Francisco over KC, but all the other games so far I've gotten right. So it's just kind of that week in the NFL where everyone, there really wasn't any shocking upsets today. So, most of the teams that were, heavily expected to win did win. So I just want to reflect on the day of the NFL that we had.
Yeah, my final thoughts real quick as we're wrapping things up. Chiefs still undefeated, as you mentioned. Travis Kelce's been underwhelming this season, despite the fact that Patrick Mahomes has been underwhelming this season with 6 touchdowns and 6 picks, which is just unlike Mahomes. The Chiefs still won by 10, and the Niners do have a lot of injuries. You gotta keep that in mind. They have no McCaffrey. I believe they had a couple other guys out. One of them was Deebo Samuel, who exited the game, I want to say, in the third quarter. And they also don't have, I think they're missing a couple other guys that they don't have right now. I forgot who else they're missing, but I mean, the Niners have injuries for sure. The Commanders crushed my Panthers 40-7. That's always great. So that's hard to watch. The Eagles.
They lost. But the Commanders, they could be without Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, that's right. It's my guy Mariota stepped in there and did his thing. But yeah, no, I thought that the Chiefs and Niners game was entertaining. Purdy threw like 3 picks. I'm pretty sure Mahomes threw 1 or 2. I think 1. So yeah, pretty wild game.
All right, well, it was a very fun weekend, as I always say, in sports, and we'll look forward to more matchups next week, especially in college football. Jack, of course, we have Illinois taking on Oregon, and you have Oregon State taking on Cal. There is another game actually on Friday that is a little bit bigger than most people think. It's UNLV taking on Boise State. That one is Friday. And UNLV, they just came off winning at Reeser, and Boise State's been a hot team this week or this season so far, Jack. What are your thoughts going into that matchup?
I mean, even though UNLV is on a mini tear right now, I think that the Broncos should win that game. I mean, Ashton Jeanty, he's had a great season, and I do think that he should win Heisman. So I'll say that the Broncos win that game by 10. What do you think?
I'm going to take Boise State too. I think just because the game's in Boise. It's actually not. It's in UNLV, or UNLV's hosting that game, I believe. I'll have to look that up real quick. I thought maybe it was going to be at Albertsons Field, the blue field, Jack, that they're famous for. But actually, I believe UNLV is hosting that game, and they are. But Boise State is favored in that game just by a field goal. I'm going to say Boise State wins this game by a touchdown. I'm going to say they win this one. I'm going to say it's low scoring. I'm going to say Boise State wins this one 27-20.
Okay, I'll say Boise State wins. I said by 10. So I think I said by 10. So 34-24. Ashton Jeanty will have at least 2 touchdowns this season. He has 126 carries, just over 1,200 yards, 17 scores. 10 yards a carry. That guy's a monster. So he should win the Heisman. If Dylan Gabriel doesn't continue his tear, I mean, we'll see, but I think it's going to come down to either Hunter, Jeanty, or Gabriel. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Jackson. It's been a pleasure.
Well, Jack, we thank you for joining us today. It's been fun, and we'll reconnect with you next week.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.